'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. Well, it's taken me 45 weeks to get a little quote from Shakespeare in, but some of you might recognise that as a quote from a very famous soliloquy in Hamlet. Welcome along to the latest in my year in the life of an executive coach videos. I've reached week 45, and the reason I started with that quote is because it's about gardens, and the metaphor I'm exploring this week is the metaphor of leaders as gardeners. And for those of you who've caught some of my earlier videos in the last couple of weeks, I'm working my way through this book, Metaphors We Lead By, published by Routledge and edited by Mats Alverson and Andre Spicer. And in this book there are a number of leadership metaphors which the authors explore. Last week I did a video on leaders as saints, so leading through moral peak performance. This week the focus is on leading as a gardener. And I wonder what you think the purpose of contemporary work is. I suspect that for many people they would be answering along the lines of personal fulfillment, reaching one's full potential. These are quite common ideas. They go back a long way, of course, don't they? Back to Maslow's hierarchy of need, and much that's been written around that. But it's that idea of personal fulfillment and personal growth. Are you a leader who likes to encourage the growth in others? Is that something that's important to you? Do you pride yourself on being a leader who facilitates and encourages growth? I love the chapter in the book that we've got to this week. It's written by Tony Hazard and Sverre Spolstra, and they are very good at challenging definitions of these words. So I wonder what you think growth means. A lot of people would find it hard to argue with the notion that as a leader, one of my key roles is to encourage growth in other people. But what exactly do we mean when we say that? How do we want to encourage them to grow? How do we want to facilitate growth? What does that actually mean? The authors in chapter 5 of Metaphors We Lead By suggest 3 possible areas. It might be growth in wisdom. In other words, we are helping people to become less daft as they become more experienced in life and in their work. It might also be growth in terms of personal contentment. So actually I feel more satisfied and content with my work than I did a year ago. It could be growth in terms of technical skill. So in other words, quite specific to my role within the organisation, I experience growth because my skill and ability to get tasks done develops through time. But it's worth just spending a moment exploring, thinking about what growth means for you. Now, the authors go on in this book to identify and acknowledge the fact that gardening as a metaphor for leadership is overwhelmingly positive. It's about preparing the ground, and it's about helping to create the right conditions for growth, whatever that might mean. So it's about growth, it's about nurturing, it's about watering, it's about fertilizing. These are overwhelmingly positive things that we are doing potentially to people that we are leading. But they're wise enough to also acknowledge that there's a darker side to gardening, isn't there? Cutting, pruning, shedding, weeding, staking, getting rid of dead wood, chopping, deadheading. These are all tasks that gardeners do in order to maintain healthy flowers and a healthy garden, healthy crops, etc., etc. So it's not all positive. There's a dark side to this metaphor. And in the book, they create this little matrix, which I quite like actually, and it identifies here 4 different types of gardening focus. So for example, if you're a landscaper and you've got a strong focus on the aesthetics of the garden and a focus on growth and development, then in terms of leadership practice, what you might be trying to do is looking to improve the working environment of your folk. Maybe that's you. And the top right of this little matrix there, if you're a pruner, then you might actually be thinking about withdrawing incentives from those who are not performing well enough, according to whatever criteria you are setting. Bottom left, as a crop rotator, you might be taking rather difficult and very practical decisions about functionally justified competencies. So I need you to get to this point, and therefore we're going to do this to ensure that you get to this point in terms of your professional development. And lastly, bottom right, the harvester, you may well be looking at making performance improvements through maybe greater work intensity or increased rationalization, potentially even job cuts. So I like the focus here on the negative and the positive aspects of the gardening metaphor, and the authors are at pains to point out that the 4 categories of this matrix that are on screen at the moment, they're not permanent states. They describe them as effectively leadership interventions that we might choose to put in play depending on the context that we're working in. So there we go, just some thoughts on this chapter. As you might have guessed, I've gone on slightly longer this week than I normally do, partly because I find this metaphor very interesting, and my own tagline as a coach is supporting your development. So this as a metaphor does chime with me. So really interested to hear your thoughts on what I've shared this week. As ever, please do comment if you would like to do so, and it would be great to hear from you if you yourself or one of your colleagues or one of your workmates would appreciate some coaching support from me. Please do get in touch. My email address is info@petelastcoaching.co.uk. Thanks very much for tuning into this video, and I'll be back next week with the next chapter in Metaphors We Lead By. Have a great week.